Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of American Gods. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's pick up with Laura's situation. I thought that was so fascinating how we just start with her just on what is essentially, I guess, the afterlife cosmic elevator. So we end up, they're in kind of essentially, and I guess it's the perfect analogy for purgatory. It's a literal waiting room. And Laura, being who she is very impatient, just kind of like, I'm curious what she wanted out of it. Is she just kind of like, all right, just like send me on to the next slide? Because obviously we were down this road before with her back in season 1, and she fought it and she got away. From Anubis and everything. So it's interesting to be in this. I guess she's still latching on to certain aspects of life, but I think for her, I'm just so curious what she really would have wanted for it. Is it just kind of like, yes, I accepted it, but it's not really I accepted it. It's just, I don't have much choice. I left this all in mad situation to get revenge. And for her, she felt like she didn't have anything else. She didn't have Shadow. All she had was her revenge. Only person that could help her get revenge would be Mad, because he has to get Gungnir out of his horde. So I just still don't just know what she really wanted from all this. But the whole situation, first her stealing someone else's ticket, which I'm like, yeah, that's a Laura move. Then going in the hallway, but then can't go through any doors, and then the hallway starts getting eaten up into an abyss, because I guess it's like she kind of broke the rules, which once again kind of another Laura move, but she broke the rules, and it's kind of like, you're not supposed to be here yet, you're supposed to wait your turn. She gets up in a theater room, she's waiting, and eventually the usherette and then the AV dudes show up, and it's like, I love she's immediately like, please don't tell me we're going to watch the life of Laura Moon. And she kind of breaks down a specific event in her life, because she feels like that's the crux, kind of like a focal point of her life, because it's like, oh, I manipulated the situation because I was pissed at my mom. I suggested my dad help this lady out, and then eventually I'm the one that said, oh, we should go to the pool, and then I decided to stay in my room, and eventually they shacked up, and it turned into a whole thing of her dad sleeping with other women, her mom getting upset, having affairs of her own, back and forth. And so basically showing you just the effed up dynamic that was her family situation. And it's like, because of that family situation, because I effed up their lives, and that, that effed upness ended up sparking more effed up stuff in me. And so I pretty much ruined everything. And she's like, I acknowledge that. I accept that. That's something, but she's like, almost like there's nothing I can do about it, but I do recognize that now that I F up everything. And she's like, and I'm okay with that. It's like, and I think that's the biggest lie of all of it, saying that she's okay with it when she's not. Because I think for her, it's like, she doesn't really believe people can change. She doesn't believe she can change. It's like, it's written in my DNA that I'm going to be a fuck up, because, I was like that ever since I was a kid. But they changed the perspective on her when they make her realize that it wasn't on you. And I like that, because from her, she was so quick to tell you the story. She's like, all right, let me just skip through this. Fine, you want to know what happened? She literally walked into the screen and broke it down about what happened. But then we get the truth of the situation. She internalized so much of it, blaming herself, being like, it was my fault that everything went wrong. But we realized everything she had said, oh, I said this, and that led to these events. All those suggestions were her dad's own suggestions. Oh, let's go to the pool. You'd like that, honey, right? Okay. Oh, well, there's no kids pool, so you probably want to stay in and watch cartoons. I'll get some candy from the minibar. She's like, okay. So she internalized so much because she was a kid and blamed herself for all the terrible stuff that befell her family. So she started thinking she was a kid, so she didn't really completely understand it. And kids have a tendency, to internalize that, to blame themselves. And she's been carrying that her entire life, being like, I'm a fuck up. I have been, my family situation. It's like, she almost feels like she messed up their lives, and their continued fucked upness is byproduct of her fucked upness, which just made her even more effed up. But at the end of the day, it's like, you were a kid. They were supposed to protect you. You are not responsible for what befell their lives. That was them. But and Laura's been carrying that with her entire life, blaming herself, being like, oh, I'm a fuck up, and just kind of accepting it. And she's like, that's what I wish I knew in my life. And, the AV dude's like, well, now you know. And it's like, yeah, but it's like knowing that now doesn't do me any good. Maybe I came to these realizations when I was still alive. Maybe I could have done something. Maybe things could have been better. You know, I mean, because she lived her entire life knowing, believing that, and that had such an adverse effect on you. I mean, that's kind of just, I mean, that's the thing, like how much your parents' behavior can affect you so much, especially as a child, because you're so malleable, you're so influenced by them, you know? So it can have, obviously, both, your parents can have both a positive or a negative effect on you. And so it's sad to see Laura's life became that. I need to go back and look, but the outfit she's wearing is the outfit she originally died in back in season 1 when she originally died. Like, isn't it? I think that's the same outfit. That's what I was thinking the entire time. I mean, obviously there's other hints to her death because there's like the whole bug spray thing, because obviously she would do that inside the jacuzzi. And hell, there's even a point where she slipped in, like walked through the door, fell into a jacuzzi, and was about to get clothes off and die, because that's kind of what she did constantly, because her own like self-hatred of herself led to her keep constantly doing that, because it's like it's like, I think because of the way she looked at herself and viewed herself, it made her kind of view her life the same way, you know, because it's kind of like, all I do is kind of mess up everything around me. So, but back on the outside, she picks up the pamphlet again, and it's about kind of accepting both the past with your personal life, your professional life, you know, and just kind of calmly waiting and looking to the future. So I'm so curious to see like where her storyline takes her, you know, now that she's kind of in the afterlife and everything. I was almost halfway expecting us to get back to Mad. Granted, he doesn't have the coin in his hand, but I'm wondering maybe that's where the storyline kind of comes full circle, where somehow she's able to come back and she believes in Mad and is able to resurrect him as, you know, the sun god that he once was and still kind of is. Maybe that's where that's going to go. I don't know. We haven't cut back to the Mad situation at all, so I'm assuming he's still dead. Because I don't think giving him his coin back was enough. I mean, especially because he didn't actually hold on to it, but we'll see. Maybe this journey of self-discovery is just the beginning for Laura, or maybe it is the end of her story. I don't know. I'm curious to see how that ends up playing out. Another avenue to this series, this episode, I don't know why I said there, was the whole situation, correcting something I was thinking. Like, I thought Demeter was kind of a name for someone that we'd met before, but was going by an alias, but it's like someone we hadn't really met before, at least not that I'm aware of. Once again, I'm not well versed in mythologies and stuff like that, so I don't know who Demeter is. I'm assuming because of the opening, she's like a harvest god or something, or like, you know, or a god of bounty or something like that. I'd probably lean more towards a harvest, but it turns out that her and Odin were a thing back in the day. Granted, they haven't seen each other apparently in like 250 years, which had also solidified some questions I had. I was like, does Cordelia know the whole thing? But it's like, no. And it makes sense that she would, because literally last episode, Shadow was like, if it ever gets too much, call me, because he knows what it's like to be in the dark. Like, obviously the way Cordelia is kind of answering and asking, you know, it's like she's the new Shadow, but what did Odin do? He kept Shadow in the dark. Shadow's situation is a little different from, I think, Cordelia's. I don't think he needs Cordelia to come to the truth in her own. It's just kind of like, well, my son's not going to help me out. Which, that's another thing to this episode, I think, is, you know, this episode continues to point out, like, how, when you look back at Shadow and Wednesday's relationship over the course of seasons 1 and 2, it's so interesting to look where it is now in season 3, because, like, you know, he's like, oh, you know, there's sharper than a serpent's tooth or something like that is, you know, a thankless child or something like that. It's like that dynamic was not like that, because Shadow like believed in, well, especially in season 2, he believed in Wednesday. But to be fair, that relationship did shift over the course of season 2 as well. So it's not like, but it shifted even more now, knowing like, oh, you're my dad, and obviously the complicated feelings that Shadow has about that. But obviously, Wednesday's trying to reunite with his old love, getting all dressed up for it and everything, got Cordelia doing stuff. And it's almost just kind of like, I don't really want to listen to what you have to say, even though you're trying to give me some sound advice and stuff like that. We also found out that that death metal band that was worshiping him early in the first episode, apparently they got killed. So I'm assuming that's Mr. World, or Mrs. World, or that could be something else we'll circle back to, where it's kind of like, maybe it's kind of open hunting seasons, or not just, I mean, maybe this is just an old god thing, but it might just be the gods in general. Maybe it's hunting season on the gods. Just with stuff with Bill Quist, which we'll get to later on, makes me think maybe there's something to that, or maybe not. Maybe this is just Miss World being like, all right, gloves are off, I'm going to strike back. Like, killing them specifically because they worship him, and even him being like, well, that's going to have to be something that, because she was like, weren't those your guys? And it's like, well, that's going to have to be something that has to wait. So, but he's like, oh, this must be the place that Demeter owns or something, but it turns out it's not just like a retreat. It's actually kind of a mental facility, and she's a patient there, which he was kind of shocked by, because at first he's like, wait, you own this place, right? And she's there taking pills. She's like, no, because in her own way, this place allows for her to be worshipped. She's surrounded by people who believe in the whole thing of like, oh, you're a goddess, they'll believe you as a god. He's like, if you told him you were, but Odin being like, if you told them you were the Lizard King, they believe it too. For him, it's like, this isn't real worship. It's like, but for her, it's like, it's been so long since she's been worshipped. I mean, that's the old gods for you. Like, they're so old that like humanity's kind of passed them on the wayside. That's why the new gods are able to kind of rise up, because they're the new hot blood. They're in the humanity's main consciousness, because the old gods are long forgotten. So for her, it's like being able to get even this little bit of worship, it's fine. But even then, he's like, it's sacrilege, because it's basically like you're going for scraps, like not even like full-blown scraps. You're going for like pseudo, it's almost like a placebo. It almost feels like a placebo to a certain extent. But even she's kind of sees through him, because obviously you have Odin bringing up the whole thing about like, oh yeah, the guy that's supposed to be your conservator and stuff like that. He's just using you because he apparently, like, half the patients in here are under his care. He also owns, like, half this place, too. So he's making, it's like, if it wasn't so personal for him, because obviously it involves Demeter, he's like, I would kind of, commend this guy's, conmanship, which obviously Demeter knows, at least she believes she knew Odin pretty well at one point in time. And it's like, ask him a situation, and she's like, I know what you're up to. You're up to a war, so it's like, all you want is my money, right? And he was like, oh, this is a trick question. If I tell you I'm really here for love, you'd be like, where the hell were you the past 250 years? But if I tell you if I'm just here for your money, you're just going to call me out for that too. For him, it's like, there's no winning this. So I'm wondering, is it just purely the worship that's the main reason why she's staying, or is there something else? Because she did bring up a question that Odin didn't really have an answer to, and it's like, what you're so desperate, all his actions show he's desperate, but it's like, what are you so desperate for? And part of me is wondering, like, to be loved. I think maybe in his own weird way, that's all he wants: to be loved, to be worshipped, to be revered, to kind of be God amongst gods again, and kind of top dog. And he feels like he's lost so much. Obviously, it's like, because he's kind of trying to gain it back with Shadow, but obviously Shadow and him are on their best terms. I mean, obviously him and Donar weren't on their best terms, and that led to, that situation. So I think he's just filled with so many regrets, and it's just, at the end of the day, we think we know what Odin wants out of this, but maybe we don't. Maybe there's something even deeper. Like Demeter said, like, why is he so desperate for all of this? What is he planning to get out of this? Well, ultimately, we have to wait and see where that storyline goes. It doesn't seem like she's in the mood to change her mind, but I'm curious, is he going to actually be able to, or is he just going to leave her alone at the end of the day? It is still that interesting thing where it's like, once you get wrapped up in this God stuff for so long, and you kind of bring humans and get them mixed up in it, because the last normal humans we saw kind of mix up in this as well, Salim and Shadow, because obviously Laura, she got mixed up in it, but now she was undead, so not just a normal human. So it's just interesting once you have like Cordelia, and also the explanation of like, oh yeah, she sounds like she's, Demeter sounds like she's crazy to other people when she's referring to being a goddess, when in actuality she actually is a goddess. Even when Cordelia's like, yeah, you signed this saying like, signing it as like 1776, and I put it as like not 1776, but like something, but then she's like, I corrected it as like 19 something. He was like, yeah, sorry, sometimes it just feels like it's been like 250 years. I was like, so it's that thing, because I was like, I guess it's like, it's too much trouble to go with I had to go through so much to get Shadow to believe. I don't need you to believe, I just need you to work for me. And obviously being in the dark about a lot of this comes with its own issues, I'm sure. But I'm just curious to see where that storyline ends up going. Another aspect to this episode was the whole search party for Allison. And I love how Anne-Marie shows up and being like, kind of just jumping on top of it. And Chad's like, hey, I'm actually the cop here. And she's like, oh, no, don't worries. Passing out cameras and stuff like that. And part of me almost wants to go, there's probably something sinister about Anne-Marie. Just because she's so jolly and just kind of on top of everything like that. And like, I feel like there's probably something to that, but maybe not. But, I also love the whole Chad thing. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry about before. He's like, he's like the optics of it, me being Caucasian and you being, and he's starting, and African American. And he's like, I just don't want you to think it's like that. Lakeside isn't like that. And it's like, he's like, yeah, but Lakeside isn't America. He's like, oh, I see your point, but it's like, and it's like, you can see Shadow kind of smiling, because I think Shadow kind of likes the fact that Chad's kind of squirming. It's like, he has a good heart, but he's trying to make it seem like, no, I'm not doing this good. I get the complicated thing of like, especially with everything going on, me being, white, you being black, so I love that. There is that whole burglary thing that is constantly in the background that you're like, okay, these small crimes and stuff like that, maybe there's something more to that. Obviously, you have Shadow spending a little more time with the property manager. Obviously, she doesn't read as much, but he was suggesting like books that she should read. And it's like, oh, well, how do you find the time to read? He's like, well, when I was don't talk about the fact is you've been locked up. Yeah, I just found time. Also got introduced to her youngest, Leon, which obviously was still skating around the Sandy thing. I think that's why this Allison thing hits a little harder for her. It's because maybe Sandy's circumstances were the same. Because she was actually looking into some, obviously, for the newspaper and stuff, she was actually looking at like Lake side's history. Like there's like full reports and stuff like that from like 2000 to 2004. Then there was like one from 2005 to 2008. Well, stuff from 2005 to 2018. And she ends up giving it all to Shadow. And obviously we are little by little exploring more and more of what he is capable of doing. Because obviously he made it snow in season 1. Still not clear 100% what his powers are. I meant to talk about that last episode, but I didn't. But obviously, like when he was picking the numbers for the car to sink into like the ice, obviously like the dates and times and stuff froze. So obviously it's correlating between like the ice or whatever. I mean, considering who your dad is, and having some weather ability makes sense. But it also seems like maybe he kind of adopted Odin's ability of sight, considering the fact is that he's able to do that. Plus, in the grand scheme of things, the dreams. Because I didn't piece together like last episode, like when the magazine was talking to him as a little kid, with the bison and everything. I didn't realize that was Bilquist. Also, like we find out like the peacock he saw was also Bilquist. So it was like, he's coming into his powers more and more. And so I think like it was meant to be like a universal sign, like him tapping into something. So I guess it was like early warning signs, like something's up with Bilquist, track her down, which we'll talk about Bilquist soon enough. But for him, he's even trying to find Allison, and he even touches his newspaper, nothing happens, like he walks away. But then the words shift on it saying bloody scarf found, or find the bloody scarf or something like that. So obviously, like whatever's going on is, maybe not everything is all honky dory and Lakeside, and maybe one of the people he's come across is a lot more sinister than he kind of gives him credit for. Like I think it's going to be revealed where it's like whether it's like Chad or whether it's Anne-Marie. My money's on Anne-Marie, but we'll see. Maybe it might be someone we haven't really gotten to know. But I get the feeling it's going to be a little closer to home for Shadow in certain regards. But like I said, I could be wrong in that regard. But obviously with the whole Bilquist thing, what really surprised me was like, I brought this up last episode where I thought was interesting, like how she seemed like obviously she was throwing up and she was just kind of almost like shaken by what she did to William. that, and now she was like late sitting there, she was crying up, like thinking about what she did. I was like, you just were so nonchalant about it before, but I guess for her, it's her kind of backpedaling, and you know, this is what my theory was last episode. Maybe it's like she hasn't had to do that, and makes her feel like she's going back to, you know, without their support, she's kind of going back to being that person again, and she doesn't want that, kind of that person going for scraps. And maybe she just didn't like that side of herself, because I don't remember her really having too much issue with doing that. And like I said, she did it a handful of times in season 1, so I don't. But like I said, maybe she doesn't like that version of herself. Maybe she likes who she's becoming now, and like the backpedal like that upset her. Especially gets complicated when it's like, oh, William's phone is there, and his granddaughter's looking for him, so that makes her feel even guiltier. But then we see someone breaking into her place. Like I said, maybe that has all, like, it doesn't, because I was wondering whether, like I think, you know, Shadow's powers themselves make him in tune with that, but because I don't think Bilquis was sending him like signs. I think this is his own powers, you know, manifesting like that, making it seem like they let him know, check on Bilquis. And even, you know, you had Odin being like, yeah, so when you do find her, ask her about a technical boy, and Shadow's like, what? Because when he gets there, he sees the technical boy. He's like sitting over there, and he's like fucking like shaking and losing his damn mind. So I don't assume. That's why I'm wondering like whether this was like a New Gods move, and maybe Bilquis. I mean, because the last time he was near her, she did something to him. So maybe she did it to him again when maybe him and the crew showed up and they grabbed her, but they decided to leave the technical boy behind because he was like, he's in a messed up situation. Kind of leave him. It's not worth bringing him. This world doesn't care. Kids failed before, you know, because we don't know what happened the last time Bilquis sent him running and how Miss World's reaction to that was. So maybe that's that. Maybe there's another party at play here, but we'll kind of have to, you know, wait and see what ends up happening because of that. But the fact is that Odin kept an eye out to be like, oh, like he knew something happened to Bilquis, but it's like, well, she's not really an ally because she's playing both sides, and then eventually she just kind of chose not to choose either side. So I think that's why he's kind of like, I kind of leave her to whatever happens to her happens to her. But since Shadow's gotten a dream, and it's like, I think it's just the thing is he wants Shadow to follow his destiny, go down the path he's supposed to. So it's like, wherever it leads you, I won't interfere. I'll be keeping an eye on you with my birds, but other than that, you kind of do whatever you want to. I'm kind of doing my own thing, recruiting, arming up for this coming war and everything. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.